Two, one. We're live. Hey, Michael Califf, author of A Very Broken System. Just coincidentally, after recording the longer podcast on the level of harassment that exists in all things Victorian law and order system, the prisons, the police, some circles of the police, a lot of the prison controlled by a unit called Sentence Management Unit, which I'll get to their toxicity before the end of this. But just quickly, I've got to touch on this. We have a story on Morogi, infamous, well known. He was trafficking drugs from behind it. Like he embarrassed the system. Okay, I was just talking about this two minutes ago, and here's this story. So I'll share this one quickly. So there's George Morogi. For those of you who don't know, George Morogi was convicted of a gangland murder and was trafficking meth, I think, mostly while he was uh, not only in prison, but in a management unit in Victoria Prison. And he embarrassed the system, and you can't not. The incompetence of Victoria's prison system is next level. But anyway, so he's running a drug network from a management unit. Now, gangland boss George Marrogi is lying on the floor of his maximum security cell in Barwon Prison, his ear pressed to the ground, listening for footsteps of his guards waiting for someone. This is how the gangland figure claims he spends his days. He says his life is in 24-hour lockdown, deprivation from construction noise, which would not be a coincidence. That would be well placed, well timed, all that type of thing. Denied phone calls and being forced to undergo excessive strip searches. They even stole a special earring given to 100%. That to me is just, it would be a given. They would have dropped it. Oops, sorry about that. It's as petty as that. It's all part of a grand plot to push him to suicide. Whether that's true, how can you say? You can't. But I've experienced the level of pettiness that exists firsthand. Revenge for Morogi standing up for his rights and embarrassing authorities, according to the convicted murderer and drug trafficker. So we'll continue. I'm just not bothering to do all the sharing and whatnot. He's become obsessed, fixated, and paranoid about prison stuff. I'll tell you why he's become obsessed, fixated, and paranoid. Because what George Morogi would be experiencing right now is he would be having AI bot technology piped into his cell 24 hours, 7 days a week, and it is designed to make a person paranoid. It was designed by Guantanamo Bay, the likes of the US military. And blessedly for me, I first heard about it during the 9/11 period when the US military were um, going to great lengths to tell the public uh, that this is how they're extracting information. If those old enough will remember that there was a lot of noise around waterboarding, waterboarding, this thing, waterboarding. Well, that was because it was an approved information extraction technique in a humane, modern way. So there's no torturing people anymore, yeah, obviously. But in that is a technique they use, which is basically, and you can remember this because there was a lot of noise about it in regards to um, the Islamic or the Muslim community didn't like the fact that the US military were using the voices of the suspected terrorists, female family members, their wives. They were using those voice snippets to and like basically aggravate the suspected terrorists. So what George Morogi would be dealing with is a more modern, advanced version of that, which is just an AI bot tech, which just completely just 24 hours, 7 days a week, piped through either the intercom system in his prison cell, even through the connectively joined like the TVs in some prisons have to go through like a connected, like through same as watching a YouTube clip, same principle. The TVs have to run through that so that they can 7 second, the equivalent of a 7 second delay, but different. So they can control the media, understandably, right? And so they can run it through that. So there's no escaping it, is my point. And they can even, obviously, in certain prisons, use the the PA system, the CCTVs. All CCTVs have. So basically, everywhere George gets escorted or goes, he would have it on him 24/7, basically replicating the effects of schizophrenia. And what happens is, why it exists is because that replication of schizophrenia blends in to the human brain's own voices in your mind, which confuses the human, and therefore you start sort of slipping bits of information out loud that you wouldn't normally, which is why this technology exists in the first place. How it has been allowed to come anywhere near a civilian prison system, particularly in woke, progressive Victoria, Australia, well, that's a question you'd have to ask. That's why we're here. How the hell are we preaching all this inclusion, tolerance, woke business, and we're torturing our citizens, literally, and they think there's nothing wrong with it. So anyway, it's what the Supreme Court was told last week in Morogi's case against the Department of Justice, a lawsuit. So that George would be suffering that, no doubt in my mind about it. So it goes on, that story in The Age, The Wonderful Age, goes on to say, Mr. Morogi is convinced that the prison has become personal. Specifically, he takes the view that they have become invested in unraveling him from as early as 23 as a form of 2023 as a form of revenge. I repeatedly had it said to me, repeatedly, we always pay back. Literally, that's the culture that exists in the Victorian prison system. The system. What they used to do, they have this, they're not nice people. I'm sorry, they're just not. The most times I've ever experienced sentence management unit, what they call SMU, they're just yuck people, basically. Anyway, what these people's, to use Magistrate Pappas's terminology, their version of sport, prison system sport, was basically if there was two inmates. So what happens is if an inmate and an inmate have a fight, they separate them, and that's it. It's on their file. Joe Blow cannot hang around Brad Smith. So they're never allowed in the same unit ever. And it's a complete travesty if, like, it's a bad breach to the prison system if they do happen to cross paths. Anyhow, so in that, there's obviously inmates who do their level best to make it be like, so when you enter the prison system, one of the first questions they will ask you is, do you have any enemies that could be in the prison system? And obviously, all the staunch guys, no problems. Put me whichever yard you want. I don't want to be with any club members. I don't want to be with anyone. I just do my own thing. So if SMU sees that, what they started doing was literally the amount of times I would see, so such and such were clearly enemies, but they hadn't ticked that box. So SMU were like, yeah, right, don't want to like play with us, right, okay. And what they'd start doing is ensuring these people would end up in the same units. This happened that many times, it was no coincidence. This was happening all the time. They would position sworn enemies. There was times they'd put them in the same cell. I saw them where you couldn't have a job where your job was to have the intel of a small, fairly small, it's not hard for, the intel unit to know the moves and shakes. You can see the moves and shakes of a prison just by doing what they call reading the play. So just by watching, So could you imagine what you could do if that was what you were paid to do with intel and, letters? It's not hard. You would know, oh, gee, did you hear such and such robbed such and such of his contraband? Because, whatever the gossip is. But these sport turned into, so my point is, he's not wrong. They would have this little personal vendetta against him, and they would be, doing their level best. And they can't obviously openly say it. So it happens in this really yuck way. Oh my gosh, sorry, there might be a bit of ranting here. So I've just read, so I'm glad this is all out there publicly. So this is, I quotation. Mr. Morogi says that prison officers left him there naked in order to punish him. You can't deny that this was their motivation, can you? Morogi's barrister said. I refute that. Senior prison operations official Nicholas Selesky testified. The last thing you want to be doing when he was so agitated is cause further drama because people want to go to work safe and come home safe, and they weren't at that time. Let me just make this very clear. When I was in the throes at the mercy of these twits, these peanuts in the higher offices, sorry if I'm getting a little bit upset, these twits at the higher offices of the Victorian system, when I was at the mercy of them and they were playing their little games with their little head doing bot, which required hidden cameras in a cell to do what they were doing with their AI bot technology, which many people will know about, with their eyes on me, because I dared to be in an IBAC investigation against one of their own, while they were playing their games so openly with me, while they were taking snippets of some of the jail snitches' phone conversations so they could use them to pipe through the PA and through the stenophone, playing their next level games, which included inmates, which included like in the jailhouse snitches. While they were doing that, I wrote in this book, A Very Broken System, there, about 2 or 3 cells up, there was another far less stable, well documented, like prior convictions for violence, down a few cells up, sharpening up what they call a shiv, a jail blade. So there he is. Took him about 2 weeks in a maximum security prison to get that piece of metal, to sharpen it to a blade. But he also had, while he was in the process of getting himself a shiv together, got himself a box cutter blade. So now this guy's for about 2 to 4 weeks, while all eyes were on me because I was the guy who dared, I embarrassed the system, that guy, I dared to challenge the system. While their eyes were on me, here's this other completely unstable, prior convictions for murder and violent offences, sharpening a shiv, ready to jump the desk and stab a prison officer as many times as he could and cut his face as many times as he could in the short amount of time he's going to have until he gets overswarmed. So basically just do as much physical damage as he possibly could. So while this same system, who is running with things like I refute that, the last thing you want to be doing when he was so agitated is cause further drama because people want to go to it. This is what does my head in. While they were doing, it's the brave frontline officers who cop it. Because while, and I've wrote that clear as day in there, because while they were doing that to me, all eyes were on me. Prison officers were, just trying to drive me insane, literally, and harass me and get me to fuck off out of their state because they're the gangsters in town and all this nonsense. This type of thing's happening. A poor, decent, and he was just a decent bloke, a decent prison officer, gets cut up. And my point is, had they spent the same one bit, and I say this in my book too, had they spent the same effort going after me as to preventing things like protecting a woman, just one woman would have lived. Just one of those migrant children may have lived. Just one, but instead they spent resource after resource going. You see where the anger and frustration comes from. The other thing I noticed in reading that is, aside the very obvious, disgusting misuse, literally mentally torturing a person with the weaponized misuse of AI bot technology, without one question of doubt in my mind, is there's one last thing I'll sign off on this one. And that is this little reading between the lines. During the hearing last week, George Morogi was referred to as one of the most complex and most challenging prisoners inside the system. Morogi has been in one prison or another for all but 12 months of his adult life. Hold that thought. Yet, in February, where is it? In 2020 to 21, Marrogi ran a $160 million drug trafficking network from inside his prison, but that doesn't count the $1 billion network he ran in that 1 year he was out. Yet we want to continue down the path of prohibition. Come on.